Hi everybody and welcome to my wormery. I'm going to be working on a couple of these bins today. These are what I've been referring to as my sister bins, and today is their 160th day of age, which makes them in excess of 5 months old. These bins have been covered with these other containers turned upside down in order to boost the moisture level in the ambient air that is on top of the castings. The idea being that the moisture would draw the worms up onto the top surface. It'll be set up with a horizontal migration to try to draw all the worms to one side so that the remaining material is in fact worm-free or relatively worm-free castings. The worms have been getting drawn to a isolated feeding zone on the edge of the bins. The worms are going to be pulled out of these two bins, and you can imagine we're going to have a significant number of worms. Nevertheless, we're going to use that population from those two bins to launch off one new bin. So that's what this container is here for. And I've got a couple boxes over there with leaves and cardboard and whatnot. The food that goes into the new bin will possibly just be the old existing food that comes out of the feeding zones. I'm hoping that it doesn't take too long, and maybe we'll catch a couple worms in the process. Okay, so before we could pull the worms out of the other bins, we need to establish a place for them to go, and that's going to be this bin right here. It's not going to be a complicated setup. It's just going to use some leaves and cardboard that we saw a moment ago. And once that's set to go, the worms will go in, we'll cover it up, put a label on it with today's date, and get it up on the shelf to start a new batch. Let's build this worm bin first, and then we can step on to emptying the worms from the other two bins next. Alright, so to begin with, we're going to use a little bit of this water. Now, tap water in my area is very chlorinated, so I like to let the stuff air out a little bit. So this water is actually out of one of my watering pitchers, and has been in there for quite some time, so there's certainly no chlorine left. So in addition to the newspaper, I'm going to try to dampen this cardboard as well. Alright, so we've managed to sop up most of the moisture out of this bin using this dry cardboard. Alright, I think we've soaked up all the water. There was no more than a quart of water in there, just plenty. So we'll see how much that gives us. I just want to use the paper and cardboard as sort of a bottom layer of bedding for these little guys. The bag of leaves outside is actually from the lawn vac collector bagger. So some of the leaves are full leaves, but a large number of them are ground up already. So this bag just sits outside and it's unprotected from the elements, so it is a little bit damp, you'll see, just from having been outside and has been rained on. It's certainly not heavy at all. It's actually quite light. What we're going to be adding in here is some of the reclaimed foodstuffs that are in the two bins right now. Their feeding zones have been heavily fed for some time now, so we're going to find a fair amount of food in there. So we're going to be able to spread those remaining food chunks into here. Maybe we'll use a little bit more leaf matter to cover that up with. Add a little bit of grit and we should be good to go. I'm going to put the grit in now, just because I always somehow manage to forget about it. So now is as good a time as any to put it in. Let's get the first of the two sister bins up here. Alright, this can all become food for them. The coffee filter here is our indicator for where the feeding occurred last. So that's where the worms are going to come out of. Alright, I think it's time to get some gloves on. Alright, let's shed a little bit more light on the subject here. We'll flip this little guy around. Try to reduce the spillage. And Let's start moving these guys over. So one of the only pain points of using these old shallow bins is the kind of that cramped feeling that you get when you try to work on the material. Like, this is going to be a good sort of first separation of the castings from the worms, with the knowledge that the material is going to continue to go through an ongoing horizontal migration to enable the worms to sort of depopulate the material. This is that nut that we've been tracking. That means that the chestnut that was there as well should be nearby. Alright, so now we're starting to encounter some of the big foodstuffs. So mango seed. Like I said, I'm going to start bringing those objects over one by one and kind of just positioning them in scattered locations throughout the bin as we find them. This is that other chestnut object that we've been tracking to see how long it takes for it to break down. Still as hard as ever. I don't see any worms on it. I wonder if it's even worth pursuing any further. I might just abandon that. Oops, piece of corn. Let's see if we can grab some worms out of here. Let's see how many we get. As you can see, I'm bringing over a fair amount of castings with them, which wasn't really the idea. It would be ideal to just leave all the castings behind and bring over only worms. You know, to really accomplish that successfully, you probably want to use a sort of a light harvesting method. But here again, I guess I've been most interested in coming up with processes that would really limit the amount of work required, so that it would, you know, kind of make this hobby, if you will, more appealing to more people. Let me just do one more stab at this section right nearby, just to see what we can find. Alright, so here too we've got lots of worms scattered throughout the material, but not jumbled together enough that I can really just grab them and move them over. So that's more or less what I was after. What remains is a fair amount of castings. Wow, look at this. I think it's a rock. And since we've removed all of the larger food chunks from the feeding zone of horizontal migration setup number 2, I think what we can do now is reverse the order, or reverse the direction again, and now start working the worms back into the opposite direction, and that'll be horizontal migration number 3. And we'll do all the shifting of the material here, so that the only thing that remains is plopping in some fresh food over here on the edge to establish the third horizontal migration in this bin. We're going to put this guy aside until we can fetch some food with which to set up the new horizontal migration for this batch. And I guess what we'll do is we'll bring over the other sister bin, and we'll do the same. We'll bring as many worms over as we can. We'll drop them in here, and that will be the official launch of this new bin here. Once again, that's the feeding zone. We'll orient it in this direction. We'll just start scooping over a lot of this uncomposted larger chunk material off the top surface. Bring over the feeding zone marker. This is the cork. Here's another experimental object. We'll put it over here. All right, so once again, we're going to pick out some of these larger food objects. This is a mango pit. Once they start eating it and it starts breaking down, it becomes this interesting fibrous, kind of hairy material. You can see why they love it. That must be the perfect size for them to eat. This is the pit, the seed. Also a popular item, I assume, but somehow I get a sense that the shell itself is really the object of their desire, mainly because it is hairy, sort of highly dense fiber kind of consistency. Interesting. I think it's time to start moving the worms over. We'll just fetch any of the remaining large chunks of food as we go, if need be. Start getting these guys moved over. Oh, I think there's an apple. Tasty morsel. I'm surprised we didn't find an apple in the other one. It must have gotten gobbled up. Going to be a nice densely populated bin as well. Just curious what it feels like. I lifted it up earlier. It's still pretty light. Okay, good. Like we did before, I guess we're going to switch the horizontal migration direction. So what we'll do is we'll just shift all the material back over to the side where the worms just were and their old feeding zone was. And on this other opposite side, we'll excavate for a new feeding zone. Oops. All right, great. Not much left to do now. I guess the sister bins continue now, except they continue without their experimental objects. They've been moved into their descendant bin at this point. I'll have to put a label on this one with today's date. I need a little space. First thing we're going to do here is finish this container off. The only thing we really needed to do was kind of cover this up with a little bit of leaves. Finish off here by giving this the traditional layer of shredded leaves up on top. I think we got ourselves a nice bin here. See the sticker on there. Today's date, Feb 26. All right, so we'll get this up on the shelf as soon as I can make some space for it. It's actually, I've got this other sort of makeshift tray set up here. We're gonna put this in here. Use this cardboard as a little bit of a barrier. I'm gonna backfill this so it sort of stands up on its own. Make sure I can level off the material far enough to cover it up. So there's plenty of food for these guys to work on in here. You know? That even makes me wonder if setting up the horizontal migration is premature. Maybe we really want to let them kind of work this stuff down first, and then start baiting them out with a tempting food stash on the edge. You know what? I like that idea. I'm abandoning the feeding. I'm going to be letting this just continue as is with no focused feeding space. I know that we've got a fair amount of worms remaining in here, so they should hopefully make quick work of it. And I just need to prop up this cardboard a little bit so it doesn't fall over. And then we'll do the same thing for the other bin. We're going to use these half and half containers to prop up these walls. Let's set up the other one the same way. And now we're in the home stretch. I guess this stuff's going to have to go back in the freezer. Okay, here we go again. Just to reiterate what the game plan is now. And the whole idea here, so as not to let the material push the cardboard away, we're just going to use this to prop it up. And we're going to backfill this nicely. And then we're going to wait. It will be a good indicator just to know that we started at the very rim, and then as the stuff gets consumed, the material should sort of collapse and condense down and drop in height. Okay. And so they continue. I'll probably set up the terrarium tops again just to keep the moisture levels inside the bins high and to keep the surface moist enough to attract the worms there. Okay, well, that's it for now, everybody. We're just adapting to the changing circumstances, and I think I'm making the right decisions. Hopefully I am. If you disagree and have some ideas, by all means, that's what the comments are for. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. I always appreciate that. And I'll take care of cleaning up all this stuff around here. That's always the boring part. I won't keep around for that. Once again, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.